some of the things that will be upcoming that at some point or another you all may have to deal with or be forced to deal with. So as part of this discussion, and Dan will get into it, but feel free to discuss your views, your opinions as far as with sports gambling and everything. I think it'll be a really good discussion with some really good questions. So I'll turn it over to Dan now.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so just by way of an introduction, how did I get into this position where I'm running effectively a sports gaming company, and I ran a sports book in South Africa. So I went, when I graduated from high school, I actually went to high school in Nashville, Tennessee, and I went to West Point, graduated from there, and I went into the Army, spent 5 years in the Army, and when I was there I met a girl. And this is the start of most guys' careers. They met a girl, and then off I went to South Africa, and I did my MBA in South Africa, just because I needed a little bit of an adventure. Well, when I got out of the Army, I knew that I wanted to earn money in sports somehow, some way. I had no idea how to do that. And so I actually applied to some MBA programs here in the United States, in particular Florida Atlantic, that did an MBA specific to sports management. Didn't really work. Went to South Africa, and in, I think it was May of 2004, Sepp Blatter made an announcement, and that announcement was that the World Cup was coming to South Africa. So, needless to say, there was a lot of need for skills in sports marketing in South Africa in the lead up to FIFA 2010. And at the time, I was working for a company called, or I soon joined a company called Octagon. And Octagon's it's based in New York. They do a lot of player management. They do a lot of brand activations, sponsorship activations, those types of things on behalf of brands that want to get involved in sports. And so, I did that for a while, and it was a lot of fun. I actually went on the rights holder side, so then I started working for the likes of, I've worked for Man United, I worked for rugby leagues and rugby teams down in South Africa, and these are all professional teams, cricket teams, soccer teams. Worked for a lot of them, just helping them understand the value, if they would just organize themselves maybe a little bit better, that they could attract a lot more sponsorship money, tax revenue, ticketing revenue, and those types of things. But what happens in a market where sports betting is regulated is that you get very friendly with, as a sports marketer, you get really friendly with the people that are making a lot of money, and that's usually the sports betting companies. Who has ever been to the UK or been to London? By show of hands? Okay. So if you've been there, and maybe you've looked at it maybe from the lens of a consumer looking to place sports bet, it is everywhere. You can't ride the subway. There's nothing you can do if you're following a single sport in the UK and not be told by 8 different companies that sports betting exists, and that here is a sign-up bonus or whatever it is. And that existed in South Africa as well. So soon I went over to the other side, and I started working for a gaming company. Before I knew it, we went and got a license in Cape Town. We started a sports book, and I ended up selling that online sports betting company to a big land-based casino group in South Africa. Moved back here to the United States after I was a little sick of living in Africa for 13 years, and I ran an ADW. Does anybody know what an ADW is? Advanced Deposit Wagering. Okay, so that is online horse racing, online harness racing, online dog racing. Everybody familiar with that? Okay, you can wager on all of that, correct? In about 35 different states, entirely legal in the United States, about a $10 billion industry in the United States. So ran one of those for a little while, and then I read all the tea leaves, and the tea leaves were saying that there's going to be legalization in the United States around sports betting. So, and that is the genesis of Chalkline Sports, and that's kind of how I've gotten to this point. So it's a windy curve. What I do urge all of you all to do is, if you want to earn a living in sports and you're not good enough to be an athlete, which was me, just stick to it, because there's a lot of fun at the end of it. If you want to follow me on Twitter or whatnot, you can go there. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this up. There's going to be 3 acts to this discussion. The first act is, how did America get to this point? Okay, how did we get to this point? And that's going to be up until May 13th of 2018, and that is prior to the Supreme Court deciding that they're going to allow the states the rights to legalize their own sports betting like they do all other forms of gambling, lottery, casino, horse racing, whatever it is. The states all have the rights to do that, and on May 14th, the Supreme Court overturned a federal ban on sports betting and enabled the states to do that. So that's going to be the second part, and the third part is, what does that look like for sports in America now? And I alluded to it a little bit, but in the UK, it is ubiquitous. Sports betting is ubiquitous. It is everywhere. It is a good thing for sports, and it is a challenge for sports, certainly from a social aspect, and we can have those discussions and those debates. But I certainly encourage anybody to raise their hand and ask me any questions that you have about this, because this is more about what you all want to understand about it, maybe, rather than what I want to tell you. Is that okay? Interactive. Very fast history of U.S. sports betting. Okay, so everybody know who these people are. 100 years ago, White Sox, now the Black Sox, one of the most famous, infamous betting scandals in America, and that was 100 years ago. Massive black eye on baseball. I will tell you that this act of the White Sox throwing the 1919 World Series still comes up today in certain circles. It's 100 years ago, but it certainly left an interesting flavor in many people's minds. Everybody know who this is? All the older people know. Who? Charlie Hustle. That's right. Okay, so yeah. Does anybody know what team he was the manager for?
Reds.
Reds. That's right. It's Reds. You know what he was doing? Betting on his own team. Ouch. That's hard. That was hard for baseball to swallow. Really, really hard for baseball. In fact, probably still so hard that he might never make it to the Hall of Fame. Yet he's got the most hits in all of Major League Baseball. Massive, massive challenge. And these are the things over. And I've been here in the United States now, having lived in South Africa until 2015. I've been here now for 3.5 years. And these things that I'm showing you come up all the time in discussions, philosophical discussions about whether or not sports betting should be legal in the United States. Everybody knows who that is, right? Yeah. Do you know what team he's playing for? Anybody? Yeah. You know why? Because he took a break in the 90s. And there's some rumors around why he took that break. So he won 3 championships, took 2 years off. You know what he did for those 2 years? Played baseball. Went back to the NBA, won 3 more championships, and called it a go. Go.
Have you heard the rumors surrounding the homicide of his father having ties with his gambling?
There was some discussions about him leaving NBA for betting reasons. And this is, I'm not trying to drum up rumors. That's not the point of this. What I am telling you is that as I sit in front of the former governor of Kentucky, and he asks me, how do we legalize sports betting? And how do we make sure that there is integrity across all of this? These are conversations that are very real, that are happening, okay? This guy, the curmudgeon of curmudgeons, he says in 2012, gambling is evil and it's the deadliest of all things that can happen, and that is not too long ago. That is not very long ago. That's 6 years is when Bud Selig said that. I don't think you have to look very far to see some of the quotes around how enthusiastic all of the leagues are nowadays, and we'll get to that. But I just want to lay the foundation, because this is a very new thing. This whole, let's legalize sports betting is certainly a new thing, and it's really only been looked at commercially from the leagues and the teams and the sports, for the past 4 or 5 years. This guy. So he wrote an op-ed in the New York Times. Landmark event. He wasn't the commissioner at the time, but what Adam Silver said was, look, sports betting is being done. It's happening not just across the globe. In a bunch of markets where I sell my images and my rights, it happens there. And you know what? There's probably a little bit of a link to people that gamble and watch my sport. But we know that it's happening in the United States as well. And in fact, the American Gaming Association, which is kind of the big lobbying body in DC, estimate that there's probably about $150 billion every single year that gets gambled on sports in America, and about 98% of that was illegal. So, I mean, he knew it because he was running a league that was a global league. He saw this. And so him coming out in this New York Times editorial, I can tell you for certain that must have been a very nervous NBA. That must have been a very nervous Silver. That must have been a very nervous, and I'll show the next guy, the commissioner, for them to come out and almost say, look, you know what, this federal ban on sports betting that was passed in 1992, we need to start looking at that. So David Stern holds up, this is the American Gaming Association conference in Vegas, biggest conference in the United States, a bunch of casinos. And he holds up his phone and he says, this right here is where everybody is watching my league and my product. He holds up his phone. This was 2016. And then he says, in a lot of markets, 70-something plus markets, a lot of people are gambling on my league and my product on this same device. And that was 2.5 years ago. Oh, well, yeah, 2.5 years ago, and that was a year and a half before PASCO was repealed. In fact, New Jersey they were still toiling around with trying to increase revenues. And then we're talking about going into Nevada. So the G League. Actually, I don't think it's called the G League. NBA's G League anymore. I think it was called the D League. Is that what it's called, the D League, before the G League? Because I think G League is now Gatorade. Okay, so I think it was the D League. I think they moved to Vegas in, I don't know, 2007, 2008. So, you know, if you talk to people in Vegas, obviously everybody was betting on the D League. You know, and they were offering markets on the D League. But that was pretty visionary for the NBA to go into Nevada. You know, this hotbed of sports betting and where everything can be corrupted. And you know, then all of a sudden you find out that, well, you know, rumors about various other sports and other teams, and then the Golden Knights go to Nevada, which is pretty monumental and a little, I wouldn't say that they're little small blocks, because they're kind of larger blocks, but there was a lot of things that started to happen in 2015 and 2016 that started this process. Raise your hand. I'm not trying to incriminate anybody, to be perfectly honest with you. Who's ever been on FanDuel and DraftKings? Okay. Do we have a preponderance of people? Okay, a few people. Okay. So what DraftKings and FanDuel did was minute back in 2012 and 2013. But what FanDuel and DraftKings did was they effectively said, look, you can place money, you can deposit money and play against a bunch of other people and compete on whether or not you think wide receiver A is going to have more yards or more touchdowns or more fantasy points than wide receiver B. And you string together a team of players. Everybody kind of to some extent understands fantasy. But as I remember fantasy growing up, it was a season-long item, which which probably 50 million Americans probably do. And what FanDuel and DraftKings did was they kind of commercialized this concept of just doing it week to week or day to day. But they didn't call it gambling. It wasn't quote unquote gambling, because that's illegal. So what they did was they decided that it was going to be a skill-based game, and that it wasn't going to fall under a game of chance. And so they went to all of these states with hundreds of millions of dollars in venture capital money, and they said, hey, listen, states, legalize this stuff so that we can do it in the states, in your particular state, and you'll earn tax revenue. I'm going to get to that exact same model here in just a bit with sports betting, but that was the premise. And all of that, I mean, I don't know if you remember the 2015 season, but I had just gotten back and I watched football in 2015 for the first time in earnest for 13 years, and I got bombarded with FanDuel DraftKings advertising. It was obscene. It was obscene. And what I'll tell you is that coming from a regulated market where I ran a sports book and I was subservient to a gambling board, that gambling board would have shut me down, a week into the season and said, you're overstimulating the market. It's just what you're doing is just downright wrong. Okay, but because it wasn't deemed as gambling, it wasn't necessarily illegal either. They were allowed to do this, and that was a little bit of a Trojan horse, I think, into a lot of these teams and leagues looking at the ability to take $1, put it down, and the outcome of it be the outcome of a particular baseball, football, basketball event. So we had the NHL going into Vegas. And then we got Jerry Jones, and he's the one that's backing it. He and Robert Kraft were both pretty ardent about ensuring that Nevada or Las Vegas got the Raiders, and both of them actually are heavily invested in both DraftKings and FanDuel. So not too surprising, they're savvy businessmen. Chris Christie, he's about to get put into some Hall of Fame, something or another for sports betting, but he's the governor of New Jersey, and New Jersey is really kind of the ground zero of legalized sports betting. The casinos effectively in Atlantic City after the 2008 financial challenge, they just simply weren't bringing in tax money that they needed to do. They had massive holes in their state budgets, state coffers, and they were thinking, how do we start to bring in more money? And so the casinos weren't doing it anymore. So then they started this process. I think it was 2012, where they fought against not just the NFL, NHL, NBA, whatever the fourth league is, but they were also fighting NCAA. And Chris Christie is the one who really just kind of took the bull by the horns and said, you know what, I am going to, by hook or crook, I will try and get sports betting to be legal in New Jersey because it is unfair. There's a monopoly right now in America where Nevada is the only state. How can Nevada be the only state? How is it that this federal framework allows Nevada to be the only state where you can bet on Kentucky versus Missouri last night? Can't be. Can't be. So Chris Christie's one of those guys. And then comes the casinos, okay? So what I'm building up to is you've got the leagues and the teams, and they're all warming up to this, and they're going, hey, listen, you know what? More engagement, more eyeballs equals revenue. And so the teams and the leagues are warming up to this process over the course of maybe a couple of years. And then all of a sudden the casinos are like, wait a minute, here's the opportunity. Legalize sports betting, we bring it all into the casinos, we offer it as an entertainment bouquet, which is very stock standard across Europe and in Africa, and we will earn the revenues, we will get the licenses. I, as Casino A, have been paying taxes to this state for the past, fill in the blank state, for the past 20, 25 years. I'm in good standings. I want one of those sports betting licenses because they're going to be gold. And so the American Gaming Association and casinos they make about $60 billion in net revenues. They contribute about $260 billion to nationwide to the various areas that they are located in. They got together and said, this is a good idea. So let's legalize sports betting, and we're going to bring these into the casinos. What they also did too, like in Kentucky, there's really no casinos, but there's tracks. And so the licenses are actually going to be going to casinos and tracks. Because the tracks also, have been contributing tax money to the states for a while. And then in comes Jeff Freeman, who runs the AGA. Never met a politician more sharp than this guy right here. Promise you in 20 years, I have no idea, but I'm one of those guys that I don't think Cuban's going to be president, but this guy might. Razor sharp. He actually connected all these dots between the casinos and the leagues and all these interested people, and he was running the American Gaming Association, and he put together something that now is the reason why it was picked up by the Supreme Court and overturned. Just some of the numbers, by the way, on Super Bowl. This is Super Bowl 51, I think, so this is a few years back. And then Trump got on board. He says, yeah, I'm okay. Cool. I mean, he was a casino owner in New Jersey, by the way, so not a successful casino owner, but he was a casino owner, and he's been there. So that's the stage. That's the stage that's been set. Anybody have any questions on what happened before May 13th, 2018? Okay, I tried to do that as quickly as possible, and that took me 20 minutes. I'll try to be a little quicker. Okay, so here they are. I'm a Vikings fan. And those are the 9 people that actually ended up voting on this. It was June of 2017 that they, I think it's like 1 out of 10,000 court cases get picked up by the Supreme Court. And they picked up Christie versus the leagues in the NCAA. And that was late June of 2017. Needless to say, those in the industry all went bananas, because then the odds makers were all trying to figure out, okay, well, if the odds were 1 out of 10,000 for it to get picked up, when it actually goes to the Supreme Court, this circuit, Third Circuit, which is where New Jersey is, like, what is the chances and probability that they actually overturn this? And so they were doing all the history. It turned out that 70% of all the court cases that the Supreme Court picked up from the Third Circuit were overturned. So all the sports betting companies and the casinos were saying, hey, this is going to be a good opportunity. And then everybody starts to legalize sports betting. To be honest, the very first wager was actually in Delaware, not in New Jersey, but New Jersey had done this, had pretty much put all the oomph behind it, and so the first bet was taken in Delaware, second one in New Jersey, and this is where we are. So, I think right now, and this changes, no kidding, on a daily basis. Well, we're looking at 10 states right now that have legalized it. 2 haven't regulated it yet. So there's a difference between legalizing something and regulating it. Legalizing it is just saying, hey, listen, we as Tennessee, it's gonna be legal. So regulated, on the other hand, Tennessee's talking about putting together a gambling commission, and then once they put the gambling commission together, then they're gonna look at who can give licenses, and that process just takes a little bit of time. So this is a little bit of a slow rollout, but if this gives you an indication, this is what it looks like, 8 months after PASPA was repealed. I think what they're looking at is it'll be the biggest legal betting market globally in the next probably 2 or 3 years. So every gaming company in the world is sitting around trying to figure out, how do you get into the United States and offer sports betting in various states. It is complicated though, because if you get a license in New Jersey, you might not necessarily get a license in Pennsylvania. You might not get a license in Tennessee, and so it goes. But right now it's 10 states are legal, 8 are taking bets, and Arkansas in particular has legalized it. Obviously in Mississippi, where I was last night, you can bet on sports. There are 79 bills right now in state legislatures where they're looking at legalizing it. I think those 79 bills are in 25 different states. So in some states there's code. It's pretty cool. Yes. And then all the partnerships come in. So then that's when MGM comes in and they say, hey, listen, you know what? We want to partner with the various leagues. And they've had an opportunity to partner with the leagues for the past 25 years, and they just never done it. It just happens to be that coincides with the legalization of sports betting. NFL with Caesars, again, they say, well, this doesn't have anything to do with sports betting. Actually, it probably all does, because they had the opportunity to do it a while ago. And so this goes. And this is what is going to be happening. This is going to be happening for a long time. Every team and every professional team where daily fantasy was legal was sponsored by DraftKings or FanDuel. So if you're in sports marketing and you want to figure out, how can where are some opportunities? Sports betting is a really interesting opportunity in that these brands are going to try and figure out, how do I leverage my relationship with leagues, teams, stadiums, whatever it may be, in order to maximize my own revenues. Yep, everybody's finding a dance partner right now. So then, that is the past 8 months. It has been a flurry of sports betting companies and casinos doing lots of deals, trying to figure out if I am, I think it's Golden Strike, if I'm MGM and I'm in Tunica, who do I get to come in and help me run a sports book? Because you know what? I have never ever run a sports book in my entire life. There is a void of skills in the United States right now. And we're estimating, the American Gaming Association is estimating that it's going to be a $6 billion industry in the next 3 to 5 years, which is lightning fast. It's rolling out faster than cameras. Yeah, so there are certainly some challenges in that regard. And that's not to say that people in the United States don't know how to run a sports book. Because most college campuses, most people, they have bet on sports. I think the American Gaming Association just recently came out and said that Super Bowl 53, there were more than 50 million Americans that bet on that event. Nobody talks about it much. It's usually in the form of squares, or it's in the form of this, or it's in the form of that, but it's probably sports betting. Who's heard of Bovado? Right, yeah, massive offshore sports book. So easy to sign up, deposit, place a bet, and when I say place a bet on Bovado, I mean it's world class when it comes to e-commerce. There's nothing in America right now that's world class when it comes to sports betting. There's no best practices right now. It's all the technology is not just. It's not just okay, it's mediocre. But all of these companies are competing with the Bovados of the world, the Five Dimes of the world, all of these offshore sports books that are based in Costa Rica, and those companies make money hand over fist from Americans. That $150 billion that I just talked about, that is going to offshore sports books, and it is all illegal. Yeah.
How do you think Bovado is going to evolve as U.S. sports gambling?
That's a great question.
Becomes more legal in other countries?
Okay, so if I own Bovado, I've got 3 or 4 billion already sitting in some offshore account, and nobody knows where it is. So I'm probably okay, but they will slowly get squeezed. The offshore sports books will eventually get squeezed, and that's happening. That's happening on a couple different fronts. But the whole purpose of the American Gaming Association was the rally cry that Freeman talked about was, there's $150 billion that gets wagered every year in the United States. How do we bring that in and legalize it and regulate it and tax it so that it can all go to Louisiana roads, for instance? So that was the premise of why they legalized it. Now, when you do that, also there's a couple different things too. What you also are doing is you're obviously taking it off from the offshore books like Bovado, but you're also regulating it from a player protection perspective. So when I ran a sports book in South Africa, and I was offering odds on you name it. There was a Ghanaian soccer game that I offered odds on one time, and you could just clearly tell that it was being fixed. So we pulled it off the board, and nobody could bet on that particular event. We got complaints from players, and they said, "Hey, listen, I've already placed that bet. You should pay me out my winning bets." Now they go to a gambling board, and as a regulated gambler, as a regulated gambling company, I am subservient to that gambling board, and so I actually had to pay that money out. They manage all of my advertising, and they also make sure that 1% of all of my net revenues go to responsible gambling programs. So if we go back 3 or 4 years, all of the DraftKings and the FanDuels, people were legitimately getting addicted to DraftKings and FanDuel and that thrill and that adrenaline. And there was nowhere where they could go because it wasn't considered to be gambling. At least now, like it or don't like it, there are programs now that, and studies have been done across the globe, that at least this will be managed and it will protect players. So going back to your point, it'll probably take a few years to squeeze them out of the U.S. market, but it's gonna be hard, because the reason why we all know about these companies and these illegal offshore books is because American media companies and American sports media companies in particular are taking advertising revenue from them, which is entirely illegal, but that's what's happening in the business side of things. But I mean, I reckon that their product right now, their product is just so much better than everybody else's. MGM, Caesars, even DraftKings, FanDuel in New Jersey, that it's just going to take a while for people to wean themselves off of it. Any other questions? That's a good question. Yeah.
When you talk about responsible gaming programs,
Yeah.
Why is it on the company to monitor gamers and their addiction habits?
Well, across the globe, it's not necessarily on the company, but it is through the proceeds of the gambling that funds responsible gambling programs. So, I mean, just take casinos in the United States. They've all been paying taxes and they've put money aside for responsible gambling programs to make sure that there's appropriate recourse for people that fall into challenges. So it's not necessarily it's not onus isn't necessarily, that money usually gets allocated through government kind of channels to nonprofits, and those nonprofits then make sure that there are responsible gaming programs. Does that make sense? So they're responsible for the money, maybe not necessarily for the programs themselves. Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about esports and betting?
Yes.
Is that a topic?
Yes, it is. It is, and I'm going to get there.
Okay.
I'm going to get there, because that is a really interesting question. Yeah. When I talk global, I'll discuss that very quickly. Okay, so let's just. Any other questions? No. Let's talk Tennessee. What's happening in Tennessee? Yeah, there's certainly some lawmakers that are looking to legalize it. And you know, you don't have to look real far. You know, it's usually professional sports teams and communities that are looking that want to legalize. You know, to legalize sports betting, it creates more engagement, and that more engagement usually is more revenues for those particular leagues and teams. If I can just maybe address that point in particular. So I talked about the White Sox and the Black Sox and the Charlie Hustle and all of these problems that have happened in the past. Well, so what the leagues came out and took a stance on about 2 years ago is they said, look, we want to make sure that we have integrity in our events, and so we want proceeds from the sports betting companies to fund the integrity of our events. Okay. Now there's a couple of ways to look at that. One of the ways that you could look at that is saying, well, you know, you've been running the NFL now for 52 Super Bowls, and sports betting has only been legal in Nevada, so why do you really need more money in order to make sure that there's integrity across the board? Is one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it, ESPN just came out with their expose on Outside the Lines with this referee. The referee. Who? Yes. Anybody read that? Holy smokes, it's about 6,500 words of pure adrenaline. It is awesome to read. It is terribly disturbing. You are watching an individual unravel of note, but it will tell you to pretty good detail how one referee can affect an NBA game and a series and playoffs. He says himself, let's just say, for instance, that this year in the NBA, for those that follow this type of stuff, I do, overs and unders, which is the total number of points that are scored in a basketball game, let's just say on average it had been, you know, close to 100. This year in particular, the average scoring is through the roof. Like, it's statistically, it's an anomaly on how much scoring is happening these days, and some of that has to do with the quality of the and how much people maybe value the three-pointer over everything else. But he was saying in the mid-2000s that he can affect a game by about 6 points, which one referee affecting it by 6 points. So how many referees are there? So you can figure out real quickly that 6 points is the give or take on a lot of wins. Yeah, that's the other way to maybe look at. The leagues are really looking at how do they monitor lines? Because if I want to know the share price of Apple, right? I just go to the New York Stock Exchange and I go, what is the share price of Apple? Because all this money coming in and all these people that are buying Apple shares versus selling Apple shares, it's going to give me a market price, right? We all know guns and butter, okay? Same thing happens in sports betting as well, though. So when Man United plays Chelsea, right, over on that side of the pond, and there's millions and millions and millions of dollars that are coming in on that particular game, money actually determines what that price is. And so what the leagues are saying is that we need a lot of integrity monitoring systems in order to make sure that certain games do not have statistical anomalies in those prices. And so the leagues are saying, hey, look, we need money in order to do this. That's one of the reasons why the league wants money, but another reason why the league wants money is just because they are commercial entities and they've got owners that are savvy businessmen and they just want money. So, Tennessee looking to legalize sports betting. I don't know Weatherby, not real sure who this guy is, but he's talking about it on Beale Street, interestingly enough. I mean, I'm fascinated by the fact that I could literally, I mean, when I was 45 minutes away from Tunica and I could just run down real quick and play some bets and come back. Not a problem. Not a problem at all. Now, I will tell you this, grew up in Nashville, mid-90s to date myself, and Tennessee did not have a state lottery, right? So what did I do if I wanted to play the lottery? I just tootled up to Kentucky real quick, chopped over the border, bought my tickets, came back. Now, if you're Tennessee, there comes a point when you just go, okay, you know what? Why is everybody else legalizing this thing? And I might philosophically, I might not ever want to legalize, gambling. Like Texas is pretty stiff on gambling. Utah will never legalize sports betting. We all know this. But if you're a state looking for some additional revenues, you're probably looking for, looking to legalize it, and that's one thing that might happen. There's Tunica, was there last night, interestingly enough. And this is stats. I'm a stats and data guy. Here's stats and data. Oh, sorry, go right ahead.
No, I was just gonna ask, like, when you were talking about the referees and stuff.
Yeah.
How exactly can you even monitor that? I mean, you go back to the NFL playoffs and the referee missing that call in the Saints
Yes.
Rams game.
Yes.
I mean, how can you monitor whether they're doing it or not?
Okay, so I again, I'm not a massive ESPN fan, but I will tell you, if you read that article, you will understand the level of complexity that they are analyzing the data. So on the games that Donaghy bet on, he called a preponderance of fouls on the team that he bet against to the tune of, I think it was 20, they took 30 games, 23 times he called fouls on the team that he bet against more than the other team. 3 times it was equal number of fouls, and 4 times it was the other way around. So, yeah, we're a data-driven world these days, and we out of a simple. But then they also had a bunch of people analyzing all the games and those types of things as well. And then he talked about how he could actually fix it. So whoever knows basketball, this is an interesting point. The second the game started, he would call it an illegal defense on the team that he wanted to lose. And what that did was that created a scenario inside of the other team where they were like, oh my gosh, if we get another one, we're going to get a technical foul. So then they soften up their defense for the whole rest of the game. Does everybody understand how that works? That is what the leagues are so scared of. And that is a palpable reason for them to be scared of sports betting for that very reason.
Have you seen the movie Blue Chips? I have a basketball movie.
Was that Shaq?
Yeah, it was Shaq.
And Nick Nolte, I haven't seen it.
Shaq, Penny, Nick Nolte.
Yeah.
Well, they didn't lose the game, but one of the players, to cover the spread,
Yeah.
was basically throwing.
Yeah.
But they didn't, he had good stats.
Sure.
22 points, 11 rebounds.
Yes.
And they still won the game.
Yes.
Do you think, in your opinion, there would be more of that going on?
More so than now.
More so than now?
No, I'm asking, I think that stuff happens, probably to some extent. The question is sports betting has never been legal, and so we don't really have the facilities in order to start to monitor those types of scenarios. But yes, I'm a realist, this stuff probably happens. I don't mean to burst anybody's bubble.
So are leagues now, when they go back and they do like their game by game report of referees, they're looking for things like that now?
Without a doubt, and they're bringing, I mean, the amount of smart, smart analytic minds to assist these leagues in tracking data, and every data point that you could ever imagine, they are tracking these things on behalf of the leagues. And the leagues are saying, look, we need money in order to do this. They don't make enough. And so let's make sure that we are well funded in order to make sure that at least if this happens, we are aware of it. Maybe and a little more proactive rather than reactive. Anybody else? Good questions, awesome questions actually. So this is what happens in New Jersey. All of these green dots. 80% of the New Jersey traffic is within 10 miles of the border. So we were just talking a little bit about how I just tootled on down to Tunica. Yeah, well, there's so many New York state senators that are sitting there going, oh my gosh, we know that we're losing so much revenue to New Jersey. And GeoComply are responsible for supplying the technology to all of the sports betting companies to make sure that all the bets are placed inside of New Jersey. So this is the level of sophistication that is happening that will happen across the United States, and it's clearly an indication that yes, you're getting a lot of people maybe that are on the coast, which is where a lot of people live, but also you're getting Pennsylvania and New York people that are just popping over and placing bets. Consequently, Tennessee will probably start to look at that when they look at this map and go, well, Kentucky, I live in Lexington right now. I mean, that's pretty, we gamble a lot on horses and stuff. We've got the Kentucky Derby, probably going to legalize soon. Arkansas is already legalized. Mississippi, Alabama will probably take a little while. North Carolina, Georgia will probably take a little while. But there could be some seepage into these other states. And, if we're not just massively opposed to it, why not just legalize sports betting as well? Just on the numbers, just real quick, like what is sports betting in comparison to everything else? Might provide some perspective. So these are Nevada casino numbers in 2018. These are across the entire state. So I think they do about $11 billion in net revenues, and sports betting is kind of a drop in the bucket right now in Nevada. And what is everybody betting on? That's what it looks like. Does this make sense? Everybody buy this? What I will tell you is that football is pretty flat these days. Football runs into the following challenges just from a betting perspective. There's only so much inventory, right? I've only got Saturdays on college. Well, okay. Nowadays, college football is kind of a lot of days, but primarily on Saturday and NFL's on Sunday. But I mean, there's really the NFL might go from 16 to 18 games, but again, not very much. Whereas here, 82 games. There's a lot of opportunities there for both college and pro. Basketball is one of the fastest growing sports in Nevada around sports betting. And now that they have this across the globe, they do it all the time. So once a game starts, it's called live and play. So let's just say for instance, okay, the Super Bowl this past year, the line went. Does anybody know what the opening line was for Rams Patriots? I think it was like -1, to be honest. And then all this money came in on the Patriots before the game, and it went to -2.5. And then right before the game started, then it went kind of back to like -2, -1.5, something along those lines. Now, that happens once the game starts as well. So once the opening whistle starts, then people are still betting on the game, and they're saying, well, who's going to win? And what's the total points going to be, right? Last night I was able to take Kentucky -3.5 points in the second half, and then I took under 71 points total. So that was at halftime. So you're able to bet during the game. Let's not make the assumption that all of this is before the game. And in fact, across the globe, 70% of all betting happens after the start of the whistle. I mean, I ran a cricket book in South Africa, and it was like 99% of all betting. No one cared about who was going to win the game. Everybody was just betting on over and under runs. If you understand cricket, then you might understand that. But on the 20 overs and the 50 over games, I mean, everybody's just saying, okay, it's going to be 250, 255, something along those lines in the cricket. So all of these sports are going to be experiencing this. They all need data. All the books need data. All the leagues have all the data. And so these are some of the dynamics that are happening in sports betting. Kind of the dollars and cents of it. I mean, so far it's getting pretty interesting in New Jersey. Caesars launched retail sports betting in Jersey and Mississippi already. They're seeing people coming through the turnstiles. They're seeing foot traffic, which is great. New Jersey has already done $1 billion worth of handle. Here's some unit economics. So, how much is a U.S. sports bettor valued at? About $870. William Hill in the UK, they spend about $150 in marketing. So there's a company who's there to bet 365. Anybody? Yeah, they're big. They do about $40 billion every year in sports betting. They're the biggest in the world. They did like $2.5 billion in revenues, and they spend close to $1 billion every year in marketing. Pretty decent sized numbers, and so certainly when the casinos see all of these numbers, then they think, hey, this is an opportunity for us. Our share prices are not doing so well right now, so might go well. Yeah, betting and TV ratings. Just how many people, or how many minutes of the NCAA tournament people are watching. So you can see mobile bettors are obviously glued. For those that might, if you've ever bet on a sport and you bet on something like the over and under, then you're probably going to watch it all the way through the end of that game. Because, say for instance, you were betting that a particular college basketball game was going to go over 130 points total. Doesn't really matter who wins that game, it's just a function of how many points given are scored in that game, and so people stick around, and these are the stats that the leagues and even the NCAA, believe it or not, they've come around a little bit. So they even have their brackets on March Madness. Now there were more brackets that were filled out last year than votes in the national election, right? It's a lot. It's a lot. Everybody does it. Everybody does it. See? Anybody remember this? Because this just happened. So this is the NCAA, and they're saying, hey, listen, to correct our previous comments, we set up an ad hoc committee examining sports wagering, and will work with appropriate standard membership committees, specifically playing rules, to direct review of all NCAA policies that might be impacted by the new gambling environment in regular season and postseason play, including review of last-second shots. I don't know if you guys remember, about a week ago, there was a line that was, I think it was 8.5. Guy dribbles down the court, ball's still in his hand, whistle goes off, game's over with, throws it, backboard in. They count it. It went from, I think it was 9.5. No, I think it went from 9-point difference to 7-point difference. So it crossed that threshold, and there was massive uproar. Oh my goodness! Even on, if you listen, if you're into sports betting, or if you're just paying attention in general, the sportscasters are all talking about it. They all have their own innuendos about it. Musburger used to talk about his friends in the desert. People would be enthusiastic about a particular point total or whatever, but they all talk about it. And this action is in keeping with our committee maintaining the integrity of the games. So that's the NCAA and their stance on it. Massive national education. This is one of the things I don't think FanDuel and DraftKings necessarily did such a good job around, but 20 million Americans are going to place their first bet over the next 3 to 5 years. No need to do squares if you don't want to at your home. If you want to, you can do it in the privacy of your own home, probably on your mobile in the next 5 years. And there's a lot of people that are going to be placing a wager for the first time. People don't know. Who's ever bet on horses? Yeah. The first time, well, for those that have never been, who's ever been to a track? Doesn't it scare the tar out of you to go up to that window and be like, I want a horse on Exacta, and I mean, man, all of my friends, I've got to walk everybody up there and go, okay, this is what you need to say, this is how you need to say it. I mean, it is intimidating. It is an intimidating experience. Sports betting for a lot of people is the same way. Yes, they want to put $5 on the game like I did last night, like it's fun. But they don't know how to do it. So there's going to be a lot of education that happens. Certainly see that's going to be the case, and there's going to be a lot of Americans that are going to be doing it. So that slide that I showed previously with all the states, I think it's going to expose, I think it's like 110 million adults to sports betting over the next, kind of 3 to 5 years. 1 out of every 6 adults in the UK have placed a bet on sports. India's looking at legalizing sports betting. Now, if we think America's big, it is peanuts compared to cricket betting in India. It already happens again. It's just a function of legalizing it. This is IPL on the right-hand side. I don't know who follows cricket, but it's, I mean, yeah, it's a sport that, those guys are deities in India. Obviously in Australia as well. And then you look at this whole combination between, here's about 365 here, this whole combination between offering everything that you would do in a land-based casino, but you're just able to do it all online, right? So, you want to place a bet, and while you're waiting for that bet, you can place a poker, or you can place a blackjack. Bingo is predominantly a female recreation online, but yeah, I mean, this is where we are going. This is all legal in New Jersey. Esports. That's a good question. I get this all the time. Esports wagering or esports in general is massive, and it's growing, and they're filling out Staples centers, and you guys probably know this far better than I do, so I won't profess to understand it, other than from a commercial perspective. There's a lot of interest, there's a lot of money going into it, sponsorship of teams, understanding the environment, marrying up people to play each other on various websites. Skills is notorious for being one of the top growing companies in the world, and they're just a kind of a marketplace for playing games. The betting on esports, to be perfectly honest with you, is not very big. I'll tell you why. Because nobody trusts it. And maybe that goes back to the leagues and the NFL, and it's just, and there's a lot of counter arguments to what I'm going to say, and I'll even bring those counter arguments up. But it's younger people playing that don't make an awful lot of money, that they've had enough issues where there's just not a lot of trust in the outcomes of those particular events. If I can say that. Now, granted, yes, we all bet on tennis, and there are plenty of 14 and 15-year-old girls that are fabulous at tennis, and we have wagered on them. Yes, we do that. This is just, it's just so new that it just needs a little bit of left and right limits for there to be larger percentage of betting on it. What's happening in the casino space in Nevada is they're creating environments for this to all happen. So MGM is building a large auditorium for esports to be played, but yeah, they're not. They certainly don't see awful lot of traffic kind of into the rest of the casino. Lots of opportunities. Okay, so now 41 minutes. Not bad. Who's got questions? Anything? Fire away.
Really drive to Tunica to bet $5?
I went to Tunica to bet. Yeah, I'll tell you what I've got. So I've got 20-1 Vikings to win the Super Bowl next year. Whoa, 35-1 that the Twins will win. I'm a Twins fan and a Vikings fan. Yep. And I bet Kentucky.
You said originally from Nashville?
Yes.
What's with the Minnesota sports?
Yeah, because I lived in Minnesota for a while. Yeah. But I mean, you know, and Nashville's a really interesting. I can't intelligently speak about the Grizzlies here, but I will tell you that Smashville and ice hockey in Nashville is amazing. I mean, when I was growing up, there was the Minnesota North Stars, actually like whatever B League, C League, D League team. They were there, and we used to go watch the hockey team. Then they were called the South Stars. We used to go watch the South Stars play, and no one would show up. But I mean, it's pretty amazing how sports has gripped, and a sport like hockey has really gripped Nashville. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Yes, fire away.
I know obviously there's betting on all kinds of games and stuff like that,
Mhm.
but what about even just like little stuff like players, like Bryce Harper? Is there any betting on,
Yeah.
you know, where he's gonna land?
That's a great question. I didn't even talk about this. So prop betting.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So there's a couple things. One of them is markets like where Bryce Harper is going to land, or Manny Machado now that he's going to the Padres. Everybody see that he signed for $300 million, pretty amazing. So those markets exist, and if in Europe, pop culture is interwoven into all of the UK betting companies. So for instance, when the Queen when the first son got married, and I can't remember his name, not Harry, but the other
William.
William, yeah. When William got married, I was running a book, and we were offering wagers on things like, you know, is he going to be clean shaven, and is he going to, like, how long will it take for him to walk down the aisle? Who's going to walk him down the aisle? What color is the Queen's hat going to be? Like, all of these things, we thought were flippant, and we took massive amounts of money on these things. I mean, it's when betting is legal, it permeates a lot of elements of pop culture. When, you know, where Bryce Harper's going, we were offering. I mean, I run a free to play gaming engine, and we license our software to a bunch of casinos. I mean, we offered up in Philadelphia. They were thinking that LeBron was going to go to Philly, and so they were, yeah, no, but they, well, hopeful maybe, and they had us running all of these free to play games about, you know, what are the odds of him coming to Philadelphia, and what are the, you know, actual odds and percentages. So, I mean, these things are going to happen. Nevada is really square. They're just old school bookmakers. They don't allow an awful lot of like fun betting. And so you haven't probably seen it in America as much, but outside of America, and certainly like New Jersey, we're going to start seeing things like betting on the Oscars, like who's going to win the Oscars, and those types of things. And those pop culture events are kind of fun to put $5 on if you think you've got an inside track on who's going to win best picture. Yeah.
So when you run a book or you're deciding how to create a bet,
Yes.
how do you come up with the odds for
Yeah.
something like what's
Man,
called
that
an
is
issue?
that is a great question. I can't believe I haven't talked about that one. Okay, so line setting.
Right.
So when the Rams and the Patriots, when they are put into the Super Bowl, how do we decide who is the favorite and who's not, and who's going to win by how many points, and what the over and under is? So it is a highly mathematical engine that does that, and I will say there is equal parts science and art to the creation of that. So for instance, if I'm in Nevada, or if I'm in New England and I'm creating lines, I'm probably, you know, I really don't want to give all these Patriot fans a really good price. And if I'm in California, I don't want to give the Rams fans a really good price. And so what we would do is we would always look at historical wagers on volume and number, and we would analyze. Certainly, there's a lot of analysis that happens on who we think is going to win the game and why they're going to win the game, and there's probably, you know, 25 or 30 probably data points on that part in particular. But that just feeds a part of the creation of these lines, and then you sit there and go, okay, well, I know that I'm probably going to take, you know, Pat's money, or I'm going to take, you know, Rams money, or I think everybody is probably going to take over like the over on total points for the Super Bowl was 56.5. I mean, that was a big number. And obviously there was only 16 points scored, but a lot of people took that over because they were just anticipating that Goff was going to throw zillions of yards, and the Pats were at least going to keep in there and keep up with them. So, yeah, there's doing it at scale is a massive challenge, and there are data feeds out there that give you a decent idea. Plus, you're looking at everybody else's prices. So, for instance, if we go back to Apple, I know that there's only one price for me to buy and sell Apple at a given time, right? But whereas bookmakers create our own markets, so we might come out and say, well, we think that the Pats are heavy favorites to win, and we might be the only ones out there that think that and even if we were right, we might still want to get in line closely with the rest of the books so that people aren't arbitraging our price off of somebody else's. There's a massive science behind it, and it's just a bunch of number jockeys and quants that help put all that together. At a scale where on most of these books, it's 46 different sports from Japanese second league soccer division to U.S. Lacrosse, and so as a bookmaker these days it's a tech play, and you really need savvy operators that understand pricing from a risk model and also from a tech perspective. That's a great question, though. Yes?
As a follow-up to that question, before the Supreme Court ruling last summer, proponents of legalized sports betting often argued that by allowing more legal bets to take place, bookmaking firms could more easily spot point shaving or game fixing and report that to federal law enforcement. Can you talk about that process?
Yes.
How would you actually spot something going on in the
Right. Right. So there's a few different markets. There are Asian markets, and actually this is alluded to in that article. There's the sun comes up and goes down at different points of the time, and so markets also open and close at various points as well. The Asian market is a massive sports betting market, and they create. You see a lot of prices and a lot of interesting things that happen in that Asian market, and then midday Europe, and you start to see again more of these things, and then it comes to us. And so the analysis of a particular market on the Super Bowl or on Man United versus Chelsea, that is tracked globally across all probably 150, 200 books. And so there are specific integrity companies that just look at volumes of bets that come in on all of these games, and they've got programs obviously set up where if the price changes a little too much, they start to track it. So for instance, the game might only be on Thursday and the opening lines are on Tuesday, maybe Tuesday morning, and they're tracking it on Tuesday, and they're going, okay, against the past 1 billion data points of events that we have seen, this falls into the 0.0002% of a price change. That's unusual. Flag it. Let's just make sure that we're understanding what happens in the rest of that. Now, usually it's not something that you can identify up front and before the event happens. That's a little tougher, but certainly after the fact, FIFA have a reporting protocol where you can say, hey, listen, I saw prices in my markets on this particular soccer game, and I venture to say that the league will probably start to do that as well. Now, before legalization, the bravados that I just talked about, who have seen billions of dollars come into their sports books and determine these prices and help shape these prices, they were subservient to nobody. So they didn't need to report this. They actually didn't care. It was just about the bottom line. Whereas when you regulate a sports betting market, they are then subservient to a gambling board. The gambling board says, if you want a license, here are the left and right limits with which I'm going to require you to play. Your advertising has to be good. You've got to make sure that you don't allow under 21s. you know, you've got to do all of these things, all of these conditions for a license, and one of those conditions then is feeding your odds into a central, you know, platform that then aggregates all of this data and can determine the statistical anomalies that happen in sports betting. Does that make sense? That's how that works.
I kind of understand the concept behind like sharps, but
Yeah.
as far as like I know they can be flagged and maybe you get different lines. Now
Yeah.
in a sports book and say like Tunica, can they flag someone as a sharp and give them less favorable odds or lines, or is that not legal?
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, so so when you're running a book, if I'm running McDonald's and I see somebody come in, and every time they come in, they take their gum and they put it on the floor. After like, you know, one time, hey, can you pick up your gum? Second time, I'm like, you know what? Just don't ever come back. Right? Okay. Now, if I'm running a book and I just don't like somebody for whatever reason, they make money off of me, I can just, hey, listen, I reserve the right to not allow you to place a wager. That is what a lot of New Jersey books are doing right now, because they don't understand how to manage risk, and they don't understand that those sharp bettors are usually the canaries in the mine, and they tell them where the lines are all going to be going. So for instance, we used to run, when we ran our book, there were about 3 guys, or accounts, I say guys, I don't know if they're guys, but 3 accounts, where when they placed a bet, we flagged it across the entire book, everybody took notice, and we said, hey, look, they just took under 265.5 runs, South Africa versus India in cricket. Everybody pay attention. And 9 times out of 10, that market would start to drop, right? So there are ways that you can use sharp money as an indicator for what is going to happen in your book, but to be honest with you, a lot of people just don't want to deal with them. They're not profitable, and so they close their accounts. So if you go to Tunica and you notoriously win, yeah, they might not accept your money. Having said that, though, this is a very online and mobile game that I am talking about. Usually, you know, sharps are going to send runners to all of the sports books to drop $1,000 on every single one of the sports books, so they spread their money and nobody knows who they are. Make sense? Sorry, that was a little bit in the weeds, but it was a great question. I like talking about that kind of stuff. I'm a nerd when it comes to sports books. Anything else?
Your internships, what are you looking for and what was students?
Yeah, wow. So that's a great question. Sorry, I should have addressed that. So we've got all these interns. We're based in Nashville, and we're through the Human Organizational Design Department at Vandy, and we've got a queue of people that would love to intern with us. And so we are always looking for enthusiasm. It's probably numero uno, to be honest with you. That's always been my leadership style. But then second to that is just an understanding of sports. That's really about it. Because all of our interns come in, and some of them have maybe placed some wagers. I can't confirm or deny whether or not they've run sports books inside of their own college or their own frat, and then, but there's just an understanding that we at Chalkline we deal with a lot of aspects of the industry, and so you know, really understanding maybe one aspect or another is maybe not as important as maybe just being passionate, hardworking, and then yeah, just know a bit about sports. That's probably the biggest thing. But yeah, certainly we welcome interns. Happy to do that.
Anyone else? Any other questions? Okay, well, let's go ahead. We will we'll let out a few minutes early for people who are interested to stick around and ask more questions, kind of on a one-on-one basis, or if you are interested in possibly pursuing internship possibilities. So, thank you, Daniel, very much. All right, so